For the last 32 years, a certain kind of liberalism has supplanted the ideological foundation of FDR's Democratic Party. Neoliberalism. For over 3 decades, the Democratic Party has sidelined the progressive values of the New Deal in favor of a kind of liberal capitalism that naively relies on the free market to produce economic growth that's supposed to somehow lead to an equal opportunity society. Ever since Bill Clinton, the first baby boomer president, entered the Oval Office, the Democratic Party has tried to sell the American public on the idea that regulated free markets can and will make America more equitable. Kamala's loss to Trump, however, proved that if the American public has a choice between Republican light and real deal Republican, they're going to choose the real deal every time. How cliche is it when a politician running for office says something like, elections are about the future, as if to suggest talking about the past during an election constitutes some kind of unnecessary distraction. Educated and enlightened Americans, most of whom are at least left of center, see this cliche for the cheap political parlor trick that it is. Educated and enlightened Americans know that one of the hallmarks of being a good intellectual competitor is learning from mistakes. In the case of Kamala 2024, learning from one of the worst losses in American political history. Not only should the voting public care about and study America's political past, the political parties themselves should study and learn from their own past decisions so that they don't make the same mistakes in the future. Kamala's campaign made some of the same mistakes Hillary Clinton's campaign made 8 years prior. And since Trump has retaken office, the Democratic Party continues to fail to rise to the occasion by taking on MAGA in any kind of real way, making the Democratic Party officially the party of losers. Losers do not deserve our sympathy, because a loser is someone that should win, but doesn't, because he or she fails to learn from previous losses. Losers do not change for the better. Losers do not grow. Losers do not evolve as competitors because they'll always find some lame excuse for their losses. Losers are soft, thin-skinned, emotional children, ignorant to the concept of toughness. A winner just means a good competitor. A winner isn't someone who wins every time. A winner is someone that brings their best performance to the competition by playing their game, not trying to emulate their opponent's game. At the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York, the U.S. hockey team entered the third and final period down 1 goal against the Soviets, who were widely considered the best hockey team ever assembled at the time. Rather than try to change his team's personality amidst the overwhelming pressure of the biggest game of both his and his players' lives, head coach Herb Brooks kept the American college kids, most of whom hailed from Boston and Minnesota, focused on themselves and their teammates, with the simple imperative, play your game. Brooks knew that his preparation of the team would have them playing their best in the most important period. And he also knew that a 1-goal deficit entering the third was about as good of a position as Team USA could have expected to be in by that point. Play your game, Brooks said over and over. Play your game. Play your game. Sure enough, the American college kids scored 2 goals midway through the third period to take their first lead. Play your game, Brooks continued to coach for the excruciating 10 minutes of play remaining. The college kids did play their game and hung on to beat the Soviets, giving America her most cherished national sports memory, the Miracle on Ice. In 2024 and in 2016, Democrats didn't play their game. They played Trump's game, constantly reacting, never initiating, always on defense, never on offense. Part of the reason the Democrats didn't play their game in last year's election is because they don't have a real game. They try to play consumer politics by telling the American public what the party thinks the public wants to hear, as opposed to playing the politics of persuasion that would inspire more Americans to vote than have in previous elections. This essay attempts to teach the Democratic Party the lessons of 2024's loss so that the party can evolve from a party of losers to a party of winners. In 2020's America, blame gets a bad rap, while forgiveness is very much overrated. When applied properly, blame is nothing more than the appropriate assignment of responsibility. For example, if the Springfield nuclear power plant is having safety problems, Mr. Burns should blame Homer Simpson because Homer is head of safety. Mr. Burns can fire or replace Homer, or he can give him a chance to fix the problem. Either way, blame is the first step of the problem-solving process, because blame in this context is nothing more than problem identification. So whom or what should we blame for Kamala Harris losing to Donald Trump in 2024? Well, having analyzed the results many times, having heard from the Harris team themselves, having listened to many respected political analysts' takes, it's obvious to me that 2024 was nothing more than the most recent example of the Democratic Party failing to rally enough of the American public out of apathy so that they would be inspired to participate. Put simply, not enough people voted. Specifically, progressive Democrats. Biden received 6.3 million more votes in 2020 than Kamala did in 2024, meaning all she had to do was bring in roughly half of those 6.3 million votes, and she would have won the popular vote by a healthy margin, which would have likely led to her sweeping the battleground states. Many have forgotten that Bernie's 2020 campaign lasted all the way until Obama's DNC colluded with the remaining candidates, Jim Clyburn, and mainstream media outlets such as MSNBC to push Bernie out of the race following the South Carolina primary. As wronged as Bernie was both in 2016 and in 2020, he stood by the Democrats in both races, campaigning for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, respectively. Bernie Sanders encouraged his people to vote for neoliberal centrism because of the threat of Donald Trump. Because Bernie Sanders is a soldier of democracy, and because Bernie Sanders is classier than you might expect. After she appointed Tim Walz as her vice presidential nominee, Kamala did absolutely nothing to play to Bernie's progressive base of the Democratic Party. Bernie and AOC spoke at the convention, but they weren't out there on the campaign trail with Kamala like Liz Cheney was. More importantly, Kamala never talked about big-ticket progressive policy ideas, instead thinking vibes would convince enough Americans to show up for her. But they didn't show up. And Bernie's progressives constitute the vast majority of those that didn't show up. That's not on Bernie. That's on Kamala and the DNC as a whole for not giving them something to show up for. Kamala Harris lost this election for 7 major reasons, 3 contextual and 4 controllable. The first contextual variable was completely beyond her control, and that is the ugly truth that American culture and society are still very much sexist, racist, and xenophobic. While Kamala couldn't have done anything about her race or gender, she could have stood up for both documented and undocumented immigrants by saying something to the effect of, immigrants are good, hardworking, and law-abiding people that are an essential part of our economy. Instead, she promised to pass the hardline immigration bill that essentially gave Republicans everything they wanted. But Mike Johnson ultimately rejected because Trump wanted to run an anti-immigrant campaign in 2024. The neoliberal centrists that run today's Democratic Party have made immigration the blood sacrifice of American politics. While the party takes on sexism and racism directly, it has implicitly capitulated to conservatism's core value of xenophobia, which is a political posture progressive Democrats take enormous issue with. The second contextual variable was somewhat within her control, but also not helped by Biden's team keeping Kamala out of sight for the first few years of Biden's presidency. Kamala Harris has never been all that popular, proven by her failure to reach the Iowa caucus in 2020. Coming in as the nominee with no real fan base and with only 100 some odd days to present herself to the country was always a tall order, especially if you knew how mediocre of a politician Kamala Harris was before she was vice president. She's a little bit like a female Biden in that way. Her reputation has never included any kind of emphasis on her rhetorical talent, nor has it ever included any emphasis on her bold leadership skills. Like a lot of establishment Democrats, she has flip-flopped on many issues, and progressive Democrats have a very low tolerance for flip-flopping. Finally, the third contextual variable that Kamala absolutely could have done a better job of addressing was her campaign effectively offering a continuation of the Biden administration. Not realizing that the incumbency in this election was a negative, not a positive, evidenced by Biden's historically low popularity numbers. Remember the right track, wrong track polls? I sure do. In case you don't, an NBC News poll in September of 2024 revealed that 65% of registered voters felt the country was on the wrong track. 65% wrong track, while only 28% felt that it was on the right track. Good call on not differentiating yourself from Biden, Kamala. Good call. Perhaps because she inherited Biden's campaign team, Kamala never made a concerted effort to separate herself from Biden, even though a majority of the country has been so unhappy with the country's government for so long. The miserable combination of no primary, the shortened campaign, and Kamala never having the opportunity to bring in new high-level people can excuse her for responsibility for this mistake. What is inexcusable about Kamala's failure to prevent Donald Trump from returning to power is the Clinton-style strategy of playing to the center and to anti-Trump Republicans after the convention, going for vibes over policy and not choosing the vibe of anger. The first strategic failure is the most egregious, obvious, and indicative of Kamala's core personality flaw, targeting. Partly because she inherited Biden's people, but also because Kamala has suffered from a bad case of indecisiveness her entire political life. the targeting strategy for Kamala's campaign focused on centrists and anti-Trump Republicans, while taking for granted what people refer to as the DNC's progressive base. In truth, the DNC does not have an ideological or even a demographic base, but rather a psychographic base. The DNC psychographic base of voters have at least some semblance of empathy toward less fortunate members of American society. Now, unlike the Republican Party, where the politicians are scared to death of their MAGA trash base, the Democratic Party's leadership looks down on its base, almost as if the elites in the party think they know better than their voters. Some of you are probably having flashbacks to the 2016 Democratic Party primaries, during which DNC leadership stifled Bernie's chances of winning that primary. Kamala's team of Biden loyalists, not surprisingly, encouraged her toward a centrist strategy, either because they thought the threat of a Trump second term would scare progressives into showing up, or, more likely, because neoliberals don't respect progressives for what they are: the most politically savvy voting bloc in American politics. More so than any other voter category, progressives understand policy in a comprehensive way. We know what the Clintons represent, so when we see Bill and Hillary speak at the convention, we're resentful that the DNC hasn't found the common sense to cut ties with a political family that has hurt America, not helped her. But the DNC is desperate to look like winners, and Dems have only won the presidency 3 times since 1980. All 3 because of freak show circumstances, by the way. Progressive Democrats also know the Cheney family, what they represent, and how Liz voted with Trump 90% of the time. The DNC establishment, however, thought it would be a really good idea to celebrate the Cheney family's endorsement of Kamala. Not just a little bit, but a whole lot down the stretch. Kamala appeared more with Liz Cheney toward the end than she did with any other major political figure. That 6.3 million drop in voter turnout indicates showcasing Kamala Harris with Liz Cheney was only the worst of many bad tactics that were part of a very misguided campaign strategy wherein the Harris team thought progressives would turn out no matter what. After targeting, the next 2 controllable variables Kamala's campaign failed to manage were messaging and marketing. The DNC said as much in the lead up to the convention. Kamala's campaign would be focusing on vibes rather than policy, because I guess you can't do both. The problem with the progressive left, however, is that we know more about the fundamentals of policy than most professional politicians. So telling us you're going for vibes might work to capture our attention, but if the campaign never transitions to talking about policy or transitions too late, as Kamala's did, progressives take that to mean all we're going to get for the next 4 years is more of the same baby boomer bipartisan neoliberal incrementalism that we got under Clinton, Obama, and now Biden. Choosing vibes over policy was not only a cop-out by the DNC to avoid having to talk about policy, but it was also a miserable way of committing the same mistake Hillary made in 2016 with respect to messaging. I'm not Trump. Do you really want that fascist in your living room for the next 4 years? If you're running for president as a Republican, you can sometimes get away with the I'm not the other guy strategy, but when you're a Democrat, unless you're blessed with a crazy billionaire running third party, a combination of the greatest recession since the Great Depression and the tail end of one of the worst presidents in US history, or a once-in-a-century pandemic, you must offer Democratic voters big, bold, and specific change. Kamala never went big. And after she picked walls, she never went left, because she never presented big change policy proposals until it was too late. None of them were even close to big enough anyway. Thirdly, the vibe of joy might have seemed like it played to Kamala's personality strengths, but good marketing plays to what the consumers feel. Within the context of politics, the voters. Kamala's choice of joy over anger made her look less serious, less focused, and less in touch with the public at large. Since any idiot living in the States for the past couple of years could have told you that most Americans have been pretty damn angry for a while now, and that anger only intensified as Trump worked mainstream media outlets, as he is known to do. Presidential campaigns in a two-party system are not horse races. They are fights, because they are one-on-one, and culturally speaking, we Americans value head-to-head conflict in this country to a greater extent than we do races with multiple potential winners. This is the theatricality of mass-mediated American politics that DNC baby boomer neoliberals never embrace. America wants to see their leader get in the bully's face, dare the bully to hit him, take the hit, then give one right back that knocks the bully on his ass. If that understanding of America's current collective psyche is accurate, when we fight, we win, might have actually worked. If she had actually put up a fight. She even contradicted herself by invoking what I guess will now be called the politics of joy. Did she mean she would be joyful toward Democrats while fighting with Republicans? Essentially, love to the left but fight to the right? How does the Liz Cheney parade square with that message? Did she mean we'll get joy when we win? The contradictory tone of Kamala's campaign derived from both her personality and the DNC's misguided culture of trying to please everyone by offering happy warriors. Progressive Democrats know enough about American political conflict to appreciate that there's no such thing as a happy warrior. At least not one that wins. Ever seen a boxing match? Ever seen an MMA fight, an NFL game, or even an NBA game? Do those super competitors look happy when they're competing? Hell no! They don't use happiness, peace, love, or joy to fuel their performance. They use anger to compete. In full contact sports, they're using harnessed rage to compete. They're telling themselves, this guy is trying to take something from me. This guy is trying to hurt me, and I'm not going to let him. Good competitors, aka winners, aren't motivated so much by their love of winning and the joy they'll feel when they do win, so much as they are motivated by their hatred of losing. Progressive Democrats want winners in the form of real fighters, and this election loss makes angry, anti-establishment candidates look more appealing than ever when compared to their superficially kind and loving establishment incrementalists. Finally, Israel committing genocide in Gaza constitutes another major reason why progressive Democrats didn't come out for Kamala in bigger numbers. Once again, progressives know more about policy and thus care more about foreign policy than any other ideological category of American voter. We also know more about special interests than any other kind of voter. Many Bernie progressives simply couldn't bring themselves to vote for someone who refused to acknowledge Israel is currently committing genocide in Gaza. and understood exactly why Kamala and Biden wouldn't make that acknowledgement. AIPAC. According to the Institute for Middle East Understanding, 29% of former Biden voters didn't show up because they didn't want to vote for genocide. What are we progressive Democrats going to do about the institutional failure that was Kamala's loss to Trump? Clean house at the DNC along generational and administrative lines. No more baby boomer neoliberal leaders within the party. No more Clinton people. Obama and Biden people can stay as long as they're open-minded toward big change progressive policy proposals such as universal health care. The time has come for America's political leadership to evolve from the worst generation to the greatest generation since the greatest generation. Get out of the way, baby boomers. The conservatives of your generation are sociopaths, while the liberals of your generation are losers.